There's been a lot of information floating around on news outlets as well as on social media commenting on the wokeness of General Milley and the entire Joint Chiefs of Staff. Are they woke, or are they just bad leaders making poor decisions on how to best serve those who serve? We're going to talk about this as well as how the military should be properly led on this episode of The First Branch. When soldiers, sailors, airmen, and Marines are sitting around the campfire, we like to spend our time talking about how leadership should envision the future of our services. We talk about whether or not women could successfully serve in any of the combat arms MOSs. Is it acceptable to have transgenders serving in the military, whether they fully transition or not? Or should they be allowed to enter only after they fully transition? And at the end of these conversations, we know that we've solved all the world's problems. And why do we talk about these things? Because ultimately, the decisions of our leadership affect our ability to be successful in combat. Now, before we get into the meat and potatoes, and for our vegans, the peas and carrots of this episode, let me remind you that if loving your country, its military, and the Constitution are what you take pride in, heck, maybe you'd just like to hear another perspective, then show your support for all things America by hitting that subscribe button, tapping that bell icon, and giving this episode a good old-fashioned American thumbs up. And don't forget to leave a comment below. If you write it, I'll read it. I want to start this discussion by sharing a story with y'all. Back in 2014, the Army was looking at ways to improve their physical readiness testing with the specific goal in mind of incorporating women into combat arms MOSs, or our military occupational specialties. They did this through a testing program called the Combat Arms Physical Readiness Testing Program. Tests were conducted on every Army fort in the lower 48. I happened to be the officer in charge of the program for the testing that would be conducted at Fort Carson, Colorado. That means I wasn't in charge of the testing and evaluation itself, but my role was to organize all the personnel and support needed to facilitate this event. And there were a certain number of females that were required to participate, and they had to be from specific MOSs. And then there were a specific number of males from non-combat arms MOSs that were used as kind of the best means of control. And then the third and final group were males from combat arms MOSs. This evaluation took place over 3 days, and the first day was basically the walkthrough. And this walkthrough provided each participant with the opportunity to experience the events that they would be asked to perform during the actual evaluation. And each participant was required to negotiate each obstacle on that day. That way there could be no argument concerning any lack of familiarity with the obstacles, as for any reasons that there may be some discrepancies with the times recorded. So this was a timed event, with the event beginning with a 6-mile road march while carrying a 35-pound rucksack. Then we were required to negotiate an obstacle course that consisted of 17 separate obstacles that were meant to simulate actions that would be required during the execution of combat operations. These actions consisted of filling and carrying sandbags, scaling walled obstacles with and without extra gear, such as like an assault pack, and then ending with a sprint ending with the removal of a 180-pound dummy from the back of a Humvee, and then dragging that dummy 50 meters. I mean, all in all, this was an excellent event. Each of the obstacles represented actions as close as could be simulated. I remember remarking to the scientists who developed the test and said, hey, this should actually become our new physical fitness test. And the project manager said, well, that was kind of the intent. So day 1 was the walkthrough. Day 2 was when the first group of soldiers was to go through the course and then be evaluated. I waited to go through the course on the 3rd day and with the second group. One of the females in this group was a captain who, on her off time, was a fitness bikini competitor. She was 5'10" and was in pretty good shape. And she would begin the 6-mile road march 30 minutes ahead of me. Basically how it worked was like this. Every 3 minutes, a group of 6 were released to begin the road march. This was done to prevent congestion at the beginning of the obstacle course. So her group leaves, and then 30 minutes and 10 other groups later, my group departs. Now, prior to starting the obstacle course, we would have to make 2 laps around a standard oval running track. It was during my walk on this track I caught up with this captain. We finished the 6-mile road march together and began the sandbag fill at the same time. But something interesting happened when we got to the first wall. You see, I'm only 5'7", and I've always heard this statement when it comes to women not serving in combat. The wall ain't going to be any shorter if a woman comes up to it. This statement assumes that every man that serves in combat is taller than any woman that serves in the military. And this just isn't the case. This captain was 3 inches taller than me. And that is significant when you're talking about scaling an obstacle with an OTV with plates in. So the first obstacle to scale was a flat top platform that was 4 feet tall. Now she was able to hop right on top and keep right on going. It took me 5 tries before my running start was able to help me get on top of that tabletop. So she began to move ahead of me through the obstacles. There were 4 obstacles I needed to scale, each of these causing me greater delays than it did her. So she was at the last event much sooner than I was. And with the last event being the removal and the dragging of the 180-pound dummy, she had already had the dummy removed and had begun dragging it. Now, in full disclosure, I had been trained to remove people from vehicles as part of personnel recovery. I also wrestled for 5 years, so I had some familiarity with how to move dead weight prior to this event. But I also fell into the category of the men who had served in combat arms MOSs. So I was able to quickly remove the dummy and then begin the drag. Now she did drag the dummy across the finish line first, but I was able to close the gap pretty rapidly once I got to the back of the Humvee. So am I saying that women shouldn't serve in combat arms MOSs? Absolutely not. The whole point of this story is to demonstrate how the big army is making decisions concerning the future of women in combat arms. And the bottom line up front is they're failing in spectacular fashion. And the reason they're failing is because their motivation is not the warfighter, but the political optics of achieving a desired political end state. Let me explain. With this evaluation program, they actually discovered a few things, yet the only thing they focused on was the times. The times it took women to complete each block of events, and the times it took the men to complete those same events. And since the times still showed there was a discrepancy between males and females, they disregarded these tests. They threw out this program of testing because it did not match their perception of what it would take to allow women into combat arms MOSs. And let me provide some context to clarify my conclusions. That female captain, who was in excellent shape, started the road march 30 minutes ahead of me. So why did I catch up? Was it only because I was a male, and as such, I just possess a genetic predisposition to excelling at road marching? Or maybe it was because I had 12 years of experience doing road marches that she didn't have. And when I mean experience, I'm talking about at one point in my life, there was a 3-month period where I was doing 25-mile road marches every Saturday just to prepare for a course that I wanted to attend. And we already know that physical fitness muscle memory is a fact. That means when someone's used to performing a particular physical act, even if they take time off and atrophy has even begun, when they resume that same function, their body responds and adapts quicker than someone who may even be stronger and in overall better shape, but is unfamiliar with that same event. So instead of the Army taking all these things into consideration, all they thought was, we are being pressured to get women into combat arms, so that is what we're going to do. So they threw out the results of this evaluation. Well, they didn't really just throw them out. They simply disregarded them and then set about controlling the narrative by skewing the findings. And the result of this is the Army Combat Fitness Test 3.0. And this test does absolutely nothing to measure the soldier's ability to conduct combat operations, nor will it have any effect on reducing injuries. How has the Army skewed these injury reduction numbers? Well, they just simply reduce the number of risky events soldiers are allowed to participate in. So not only does this new fitness program not improve the soldiers' overall health and preparation for combat operations, it sets the conditions to make them more risk-averse and less likely to be confident when faced with challenging decisions on the battlefield. So is this story an example of the so-called woke trend our military commanders are using to make decisions? Well, the short answer is no. It's merely a symptom of the greater miscalculation our leadership has made in the modernizing of our military forces. And this is why I don't take my military advice from political commentators at the Daily Wire or the Young Turks or any other mainstream media outlet. This is what happens when you only view all actions through a narrow political lens. You fail to see the truth, and that leads to a misdiagnosis. So what is the greater issue? Well, when I was serving in the U.S. Navy in 1999, I was stationed at Whidbey Island, Washington. At the time I was there, I was assigned as an AME with Electronic Attack Squadron 135. While there, we had a mandatory safety stand-down. And all this is a directive to halt operations of the squadron and attend safety classes. And during one of these classes, the wing commander was giving a speech on the future of the Navy. He admonished leaders at all levels to adopt a corporate mentality. And he specifically used Bill Gates and Microsoft as the future of leadership. And if the Navy was to be successful in the modern world, then it must adopt and operate like modern business. Then fast forward to 2015, I'm at Fort Carson, Colorado. And it was there that the commander of the Army Fire Center of Excellence was given a speech to all the field artillery soldiers stationed there at Carson at the time. And he echoed the same words concerning the modernization of military leadership. He agreed that the only way for military leaders to successfully lead was to adopt the corporate style of leadership. Now, I'm sure many of you watching this episode are like, what's wrong with that? That doesn't sound like a bad way to move the military into the 21st century to me, Michael. I mean, after all, Microsoft, Apple, Tesla, many other tech companies are doing pretty well for themselves. So why not adopt their way of leadership? Well, the answer is actually a very simple one. I'm going to answer it with a question. What products do the military service branches produce? Think about that for a second. What goods do we exchange for our services? What capitalist principle can you apply to the products our military branches produce? That's a fair question. If you're going to say that we need to act like corporate America, then we need to produce a product like corporate America. So what products does the military produce that would cause you to believe that it should be run like a capitalist country? The answer again is extremely simple. Our military doesn't produce any products. It has only three functions: to deter, defend, and defeat, all of which bear the burden of possible death or the execution of violence. The military is called to do the tasks that would drive corporate America out of business. You can't go on Amazon and order the invasion of a country. Facebook isn't where treaties are signed. You mean to tell me the best way to lead our military is to adopt their way of leading? Absolutely not. Our military is the largest exporter of violence in the world. And I'm not saying this is something to be proud of, but we need to recognize that's what it does so that we can prepare our service members with the greatest possibility of returning home alive. And running our military like Bill Gates runs Microsoft or Jeff Bezos runs Amazon ain't gonna work. So if I were SECDEF, the first thing I would stop at the national level is the idea that our military should reflect corporate America. And as such, the U.S. military would in no way shape itself to reflect America at large. The largest misconception of how to modernize our military is to believe that it should be an accurate reflection of society at large. What a ridiculous conclusion to draw, knowing that history has shown us time and time again that doing so has always led to the downfall of military might. And the two greatest examples of this are Italy and Germany in World War II. And that's because they represent both sides of this adaptation reflection coin. Mussolini was the one who did what America is trying to do now. He strove to make his military reflect his society to gain popularity. And what happened? His country was overpowered by Germany, and he had to play second fiddle to Hitler. And now keep in mind, China won't even return our current SECDEF's phone calls. And what did Hitler do? Well, he transformed his society to look like his military. And how did that turn out for Germany at large? That brought a tremendous amount of shame to that country. So no matter how you slice it, how you choose to frame your argument, it ends in the failure if the country and the military are reflections of one another. And the reason is simple, and I'll say it again. because there is no aspect of civilian life that mimics what the military is designed to do. It's that simple. Anything else is grounded in the hubris of military authority and political clout. So, to properly integrate women into combat arms would take time. And there's a bit of give and take on both ends here. First, basic training would have to incorporate more road marches. Men and women would have to train together. And yes, this includes combatives. The only way to get stronger is to strive. The only way to get stronger together is to strive alongside each other, those shared experiences, not the idea of one-upmanship or comparative suffering. Currently, military leadership, by its own admission, believes it should be separate from its subordinates. And here's yet another example of what I experienced when I was deployed. So I was a 131 Alpha, a field artillery targeting warrant, when I was deployed to Camp Kalsu in 2011 as the brigade targeting officer. We were conducting the right seat ride portion of the deployment change of command with the 3rd Cavalry Regiment. So they were still in charge of the area of operations when a series of rocket attacks happened in sector. 3 CR's targeting officer was in a planning meeting that he couldn't get out of. So 3 CR's fire support officer asked me to go into sector to conduct a crater analysis of the impact site. Now, while crater analysis is not the most important function of a brigade targeting officer, it's certainly within the scope of our responsibility. So I suited up and I left the wire to do my job. Now here's where things get real crazy from a we're the toughest army in the world standpoint. When I got back from gathering the data that would be used to locate firing points the enemy was using, this is the response from my chain of command. Chief, why'd you leave the wire? Do you not know that you as a staff officer are too important to the organization? Did you catch that? I don't even think they got it, and they were the ones that said it. And what they said is that the job of a planner outweighs the importance of the warfighter. That is how our modern military leadership thinks. And McChrystal's own words, written in his own book, back up that statement. And why do leaders think this way? Because they don't see Bill Gates down in the trenches with his people. I mean, have you ever seen an episode of Undercover Boss? I mean, they actually make it a point to highlight the fact the boss has no clue what it truly takes to run their company. And I know what you pseudo-patriots are already saying. Well, does Bill Gates really need to know how his shipping processes work? Well, no, he doesn't. But your dang skippy military generals need to know. You disagree? Just ask Patton what it's like to outrun a supply chain. Or ask Eisenhower what not understanding the tide cycles will cost you. And for those of you who get your history from Steven Spielberg, let me clarify. 17% of all casualties suffered on D-Day were a result of fratricide, with the bulk of those coming from friendly indirect fire systems due to a lack of understanding of the tides along the beaches. So like I said, there is no other industry in the civilian sector that does what the military does. So they should not reflect each other in any way. And if you disagree with what I just said, let me ask you a question. Name for me the one war our generals have won fighting under this philosophy. I look forward to reading your answers in the comments below, but I'm betting you're not going to find one. So to General Milley, I say, understanding critical race theory will in no way enhance the military's ability to win wars. Greater understanding of CRT and how it affects society at large will in no way bring race relations to a common understanding in the military. And you want to know why? Because caring for people is not an academic exercise. The only way to get our service members to stop fighting against each other is to get them to fight for each other. Get them carrying each other across our training areas. Get them fighting with each other in combatives classes. Get them to understand the success of the individual to their left and to their right will enhance their own success. That is why you haven't won a war, Mr. McChrystal. It's not because attribution is a myth. It's because you have failed to understand its significance. So from a national level of decision making, if it doesn't directly result in the improvement of our diplomats and their ability to use the military to deter, the military's ability to defeat or defend its enemies, then it has absolutely no place in the military decision-making process. End of story. And I absolutely refuse to let guys like McChrystal and Milley use their political or economic ambitions to cloud their judgment as military leaders. Because those who lose are the service members. And they lose their lives, their limbs, and their loved ones. And here's just a simple point of note that just absolutely rubs me the wrong way. Privates make $1,700 a month, and they have to use their own gas, drive their own vehicles to the motor pool, while a division commander who makes $10,000 more a month gets an issued vehicle, his own driver, and the taxpayers foot the bill for his gas. Why? Because he's too important. His time is just too valuable. Now let's just see what they're doing with that valuable time. Well, they're writing books and not commanding their formations. Remember that Warfighter exercise we discussed in the last couple of episodes? General Cavalry wasn't even in the division talk commanding his formations during the last battle of that Warfighter. Brigadier General Taylor, who was the Deputy Commanding General of Maneuver, he was the one commanding the division during that last battle. Now, why was he doing it? Because General Cavalry was too busy getting ready for the AAR. And why did he need to be rehearsing the AAR before the battle was even over? Well, that's because General Milley would be in attendance. And by golly, he wasn't going to be unprepared for that presentation. You see, commanding troops is no longer important to military leadership. And that needs to change. And it's not going to change until we change the leadership. I go into greater detail on how to fix the leadership problem from a Manning perspective in Chapter 5 of my book, A Political Conscience, Rediscovering Values in American Politics. But the short answer is this: stop letting our grandpas run the military. I'm all for a younger, smaller fighting force. And what is more important than this is that our leaders have to have a servant's heart. Leaders today care about themselves and their own ambitions. The examples I gave in this series have highlighted that. But in Matthew chapter 20, verses 25 through 28, we read, "But Jesus called them unto him and said, Ye know that the princes of the Gentiles exercise dominion over them, and they that are great exercise authority upon them. But it shall not be so among you. But whosoever will be great among you, let him be your minister. And whosoever will be the chief among you, let him be your servant. Even as the Son of Man came not to be ministered unto, but to minister, and to give his life a ransom for many." It's not enough to be the guy who will never ask anyone to do something you're not willing to do yourself. You actually have to do it. Christ shows us through his own example that we must lead by example. And it is that example that will inspire those we wish to lead. And in doing so, we become great. Telling people we are great doesn't make it so. We have to do the things that are going to inspire greatness. And separating yourself from your subordinates is not the way to achieve that. And we see this demonstrated to an even greater degree when in John chapter 13, verses 12 through 17, we read about the account of Christ washing the feet of the disciples. And it says, "So after he had washed their feet, and had taken his garments, and was set down again, he said unto them, Know ye what I have done to you? Ye call me Master and Lord, and ye say, Well, for so I am. If I then, your Lord and Master, have washed your feet, ye also ought to wash one another's feet. For I have given you an example, that ye should do as I have done to you. Verily, verily, I say unto you, the servant is not greater than his Lord, neither he that is sent greater than he that sent him. If you know these things, happy are ye if you do them." We need military leaders who are going to serve those who serve, not serve their own career ambitions or their own resume or their own pocketbook. Our service members deserve leadership that will make decisions that will increase their success and chances for survivability in combat. And the only way that will happen is if leadership develops a system that enables the talents of the individual to complement the entire team. Then cultivate that atmosphere across the branches of service through joint training. And that, of course, means friendly competition. Man, I love our military. I've served with some amazing people and have made some amazing lifelong friends. I want to see our military led by people who care for those people and then make decisions that improve their chances for survival in combat. That's the whole purpose of this series. Now, this series has not been an exhaustive list of the things that do need to change. There are some digital systems that the Navy uses that could enhance the Army's logistical support for sure, and many other changes that would help make our military a much more efficient and effective fighting force. But if I were SECDEF, what was discussed in this series is what I would use to make my top priorities to effect the greatest change in the most timeliest of manners. And again, I would like to thank all of our viewers for setting aside time to watch this series. Seeing our military improve the way in which we care for those who serve is of utmost importance to me. Political decisions have no place in our military. Again, thanks for joining us as we went through this series. Next week's episode is going to be a huge departure from the topics we normally discuss on this show. And as a bit of a teaser, I'm going to try my hand at taking on a social topic. So I hope you all will join us for next week's episode. Have a great weekend, America, and God bless.